Amina learned early how to become invisible. At 15, she had mastered the art of shrinking herself, shoulders slightly bent, eyes always lowered, footsteps soft enough not to announce her presence. In the crowded compound where she lived, invisibility was survival. The compound sat behind a row of tired shops, its entrance marked by a rusted gate that never fully closed, as if even privacy had given up. 10 families shared the space, their lives stacked on top of one another like poorly arranged luggage. There was always noise. Radios preaching at dawn, babies crying through the night, couples arguing behind thin curtains, the clang of aluminum pots, the coughs of men who had inhaled too much dust and disappointment. In the middle of all that noise lived Amina, quiet as a shadow. Every morning before school, she woke before the call to prayer, bathed quickly with cold water from a cracked bucket, and slipped into her oversized school uniform. The uniform was 2 sizes too big, not because she couldn't afford the right one, but because she needed it to hide something. Beneath the loose fabric, beneath the faded blue shirt and shapeless skirt, her body was changing in ways she did not understand fully and was too afraid to ask about. She would stand in front of the small cracked mirror hung on a nail in their room, tugging the shirt forward, turning sideways, sucking in her stomach until her chest burned. "Please," she would whisper to God, to her body, to time itself, just stay small. Her school bag felt heavier than it should, not because of books, but because of the secret she carried alongside them. Each step to school felt like a countdown. Each glance from a neighbor felt like suspicion. And each morning, as she stepped out into the dusty street, Amina carried 2 lives in opposite directions. One toward education and dreams, the other toward fear and consequences she could not yet name. At school, Amina was known as that quiet girl who is very brilliant. Teachers liked her because she never caused trouble. She always submitted her assignments early, her handwriting neat, her answers precise. She loved mathematics, especially the certainty of numbers, the comfort of right answers. In a world where everything felt unstable, numbers obeyed rules. But lately, even numbers betrayed her. During lessons, waves of nausea would rise suddenly, forcing her to grip the edge of her desk and breathe through her nose. Sometimes, dizziness blurred the blackboard, and she would blink rapidly, afraid that if she closed her eyes for too long, she might not be able to stand again. She stopped eating lunch weeks ago, telling her friends she was fasting or not hungry. Hunger was easier to explain than the slow rounding of her stomach. During break time, when other girls laughed loudly and shared snacks, Amina locked herself inside the school bathroom. The bathroom smelled of disinfectant and secrets. It was there, seated on the cold toilet seat, that she allowed herself to cry quietly, carefully, with her hand pressed against her mouth. She cried for the boy who had sworn he loved her, and then disappeared the moment she told him. She cried for the mother at home whose faith was strong, but whose anger was stronger. Her mother believed girls like Amina were the reason society was rotten, girls who opened their legs and brought shame. The words echoed in Amina's mind like a curse. She had no trusted adult, no aunt, no teacher, no nurse. In her world, pregnancy was not a condition. It was a crime. Each day, she sat in class pretending everything was normal, answering questions, collecting praise, while inside her chest, fear beat like a trapped bird. At night, lying on the thin mattress she shared with her younger siblings, she felt movements beneath her palms, soft at first, then stronger. She would freeze, heart racing, afraid her body was betraying her. "I'm sorry," she whispered in the dark. "I'm sorry, I'm scared." She didn't know if she was apologizing to the child or to herself. Home offered no refuge. Amina's mother was a woman of rules and scriptures, her life shaped by sacrifice and strict discipline. She believed suffering built character, and that shame was a necessary teacher. Their one-room apartment smelled of incense and starch. Religious posters covered the walls, warning of judgment and punishment. Every evening, as her mother prayed loudly, rebuking spirits and calling down fire on sin, Amina sat quietly, feeling smaller with every word. She feared questions more than beatings. Why are you eating less? Why are your clothes so loose? Why are you always tired? Each question felt like a blade hovering above her head. Sometimes her mother's eyes lingered on her stomach for half a second too long, and Amina's heart would nearly stop. She imagined being dragged out of the house, being shouted at in front of neighbors, being forced to name the boy, being pulled out of school. In her mind, the future split into only bad endings. So she chose silence. Silence became her shield and her prison. She stopped laughing. She stopped running. She stopped dreaming out loud. Yet deep inside there was still a small, stubborn spark. In quiet moments, Amina imagined finishing school. Imagined standing in front of a classroom one day as a teacher. Imagined a life where her mistakes did not define her forever. She read her textbooks late into the night, her belly tight, her eyes burning, because learning felt like the only thing no one could take from her. Sometimes exhaustion overwhelmed her, and she would rest her chin on her knees, breathing slowly, counting numbers in her head to calm herself. 1, 2, 3. Each number felt like a promise that time was still moving, even if it was moving too fast. What Amina did not know, what no one told her, was that secrets have weight, and weight demands release. As weeks passed, the uniform that once hid her began to stretch in dangerous ways. The baby inside her no longer moved like a whisper, but like a demand. Her body ached constantly, her back stiff, her legs heavy. Still, she went to school every day, determined to hold on to normalcy with both hands. She believed that if she behaved well enough, prayed hard enough, stayed invisible long enough, the truth might somehow lose interest in her and go away. She did not know that fear has a deadline. She did not know that bodies keep their own time. All she knew was that each morning, as she adjusted her loose uniform and stepped into the sun, her heart whispered a warning she refused to hear. The world had already decided what girls like her deserved. It had already written its judgments, sharpened its stones, rehearsed its whispers. But as Amina walked through the school gate that day head down, books clutched to her chest, there was still something unfinished about her story. She was still standing, still learning, still breathing. And somewhere beneath that oversized uniform, beneath the fear and silence, a truth was growing, one that would soon refuse to remain hidden. By the time the second term settled into its rhythm, Amina's body had begun to betray her in small, terrifying ways. It started with mornings. She would wake up already tired, her bones aching as though she had walked all night in her sleep. Standing up from the mattress required planning slow movements, careful breaths, because dizziness came without warning now. Still, she never complained. Complaining invited attention, and attention was dangerous. She washed her face, tied her hair neatly, and pulled on the same oversized uniform that had become both her armor and her cage. The walk to school felt longer each day. The sun seemed harsher, the dust heavier. Sometimes she stopped by the roadside to steady herself, pretending to adjust her bag while her heart raced wildly. Yet when she entered the classroom, she transformed. She sat upright. She answered questions. She wrote notes with the same precision that once earned her admiration. Her teachers continued to praise her. "Amina is very focused," they said. "Amina will go far." The words should have made her proud, but instead they felt like lies she was helping the world tell itself. No one noticed the way her fingers trembled when she wrote. No one noticed how she breathed shallowly, as if afraid to take up space. No one noticed that brilliance, when trapped in silence, can slowly suffocate. During lessons, nausea struck without mercy. The smell of chalk, the heat of too many bodies in one room, even the sound of voices could suddenly make her stomach twist violently. She learned to sit close to the door, so she could escape quickly if needed. Sometimes she made it to the bathroom just in time. Other times, she knelt behind the classroom block, retching quietly into the sand, wiping her mouth with the corner of her skirt, praying no one would pass by. Hunger clawed at her constantly, but she welcomed it. Hunger kept her small, or so she hoped. At break time, while other girls gathered under trees to laugh and eat, Amina walked alone to the bathroom. She locked herself into the last stall, the one with the broken latch, and sat there in the dim light, her school bag on her lap. She pressed her forehead against the cool metal door and counted her breaths. Sometimes she cried. Sometimes she didn't have the energy to. When she cried, it was silent, tears sliding down her face without sound, because she had learned that even pain must be quiet. She cried for the way her life had narrowed into hiding places. She cried for the exams she studied so hard for, knowing that if the truth came out, none of it might matter. She cried because she was 15 and afraid, and no one had ever taught her how to ask for help without being punished. The teachers noticed her intelligence but mistook her silence for discipline. In literature class, she wrote essays that startled her teacher with their depth. In mathematics, she solved problems faster than most of the boys who liked to boast loudly. Once, her mathematics teacher paused mid-lesson, looked at her work, and said, "You see, class? This is how to think." The room turned toward her, eyes curious, some impressed, some annoyed. Amina felt her chest tighten. Attention buzzed around her like flies. She forced a small smile and lowered her head, wishing she could disappear into her notebook. Praise, she had learned, was dangerous. It made people look closer. It made them ask questions. That day, when the bell rang, her friend nudged her playfully. "You're too smart. You'll make us look bad," the girl laughed. Amina laughed too, softly, but inside she felt a strange grief. She wanted to be proud of her mind. She wanted to dream out loud about the future. Instead, she folded herself smaller, careful not to draw lines between who she was and what she was hiding. Even excellence became something she had to apologize for. At home, the pressure thickened. Her mother watched her more closely now, suspicion creeping into her questions. "Why are you always tired? Why don't you eat like before?" Each question sent a shock through Amina's body. She answered calmly, rehearsed lies slipping easily from her tongue. "Schoolwork is much. I'm just fasting." Her mother nodded but did not fully believe. Some evenings, while Amina washed plates or swept the floor, she felt a sudden tightness in her lower back that made her pause, breath caught in her throat. She waited for it to pass, biting her lip, afraid that even a wince might expose her. At night, lying beside her siblings, sleep came in fragments. She dreamed of standing naked in the classroom while people pointed and laughed. She dreamed of giving birth in public places, of blood and shouting and nowhere to hide. She woke soaked in sweat, her hand flying instinctively to her stomach. The baby responded sometimes, a movement like a gentle knock from inside. Each time, fear surged. She had no calendar, no clinic, no idea how far along she was. Time had become an enemy she could not see, but felt pressing closer each day. The bathroom became her refuge and her confessional. It was the only place she allowed herself to speak the truth, even if only in whispers. Sitting there during breaks, she talked to the walls, to God, to the child she carried. "Please," she whispered once, tears dripping onto the dusty floor, "don't let this ruin everything." She promised silently that she would be a good mother if only she could survive first. She promised to finish school, to work hard, to never abandon her child the way she had been abandoned. Yet these promises frightened her too, because they acknowledged a future she wasn't sure she was allowed to have. Sometimes other girls entered the bathroom, laughing loudly, adjusting their hair, complaining about teachers. Amina held her breath, feet lifted slightly so they wouldn't see her shoes under the stall. She felt ridiculous, hiding like a criminal, but fear had stripped her of dignity. Each day she survived felt like borrowed time. As the weeks passed, something shifted. The pains came more often now, dull aches at first, then sharper twinges that made her gasp quietly. In class, she gripped her pen so tightly her fingers cramped. During exams, sweat soaked her uniform even when the room was cool. She told herself it was stress, that it would pass, that she could endure anything if she stayed silent long enough. But silence has a way of amplifying fear. Every whispered laugh sounded like mockery. Every teacher's glance felt like accusation. Every unexpected question from home felt like exposure. Still, Amina kept showing up. She kept writing, kept solving equations, kept pretending she was just another schoolgirl worrying about grades and nothing more. What she did not understand, what no one had taught her, was that silence does not protect you forever. It only delays the moment when the truth demands to be heard. And as Amina sat in her seat one afternoon, her body tightening with a pain she could no longer ignore, a quiet realization settled over her like a shadow. Whatever she was running from was catching up. The child inside her was growing louder. And soon, no classroom, no bathroom stall, no oversized uniform would be able to keep the secret contained. By the time the third term arrived, Amina's body no longer allowed her to live in the thin comfort of denial. Each morning, getting out of bed felt like a battle with gravity itself. Her back ached, her hips throbbed, and even walking to the compound gate required careful planning. The oversized uniform she had relied on for months now clung awkwardly in ways she could not control. Sometimes, when she stood still too long, she would press her hand to her stomach and feel the unmistakable reminder of the life growing inside her. She had become an expert at controlling her movements, bending slightly, keeping her shoulders forward, and pretending that the extra weight was a normal part of adolescence. But hiding had limits. Everyone seemed to notice now, though no one dared to ask the questions aloud. She saw whispers between teachers, heard muted giggles from classmates, and felt the sharp eyes of neighbors lingering as she walked past. Fear had a schedule, and it was beginning to close in. Meals became another battlefield. Where she had once skipped lunch only occasionally, now it was a constant routine. Eating too much meant giving away her secret. Eating too little made her body weak and exhausted. Her stomach rumbled constantly, a loud reminder that she could no longer ignore the physical demands of pregnancy. At school, she struggled to stay upright in class. Her teachers continued to praise her intelligence, but the strain in her eyes was unmistakable. Mathematics became an exercise in focus and pain management. Literature assignments were punctuated with stifled groans. At break, she could no longer hide in the stall for hours. Her body protested, demanding attention in ways she could not ignore. Yet, she still forced herself to smile, to answer questions, to write exams with precision. She had to maintain the illusion that life was normal, even while her world was tilting precariously on the edge of disaster. Home brought no relief. Her mother's suspicion had grown sharper. Questions came more frequently, tinged with accusation. "You are always tired," her mother said one evening, pacing the small room. "And your uniform, it hangs differently. Are you hiding something from me?" Amina's heart slammed against her ribs. Lies now felt heavy on her tongue. "I am fine," she whispered. "It is school work." Her mother's eyes, sharp as daggers, scanned her face, searching for truth. Each glance felt like judgment. Every night, after her siblings fell asleep, Amina lay on the thin mattress, hand over her belly, heart hammering. She felt tiny movements that reminded her of the growing weight she could no longer hide. She feared her mother's wrath more than the pain itself. Disownment, beatings, being kicked out of school, all possibilities loomed over her. And she knew that if she allowed herself to falter even once, the consequences could be immediate and irreversible. The bathroom remained her last refuge, though its safety was shrinking. Even there, fear crept in. She could no longer sit long hours without discomfort. The baby inside her moved with increasing insistence, pressing against her ribs, kicking her thighs, demanding attention. Amina tried to quiet it with soft whispers, holding herself tightly as though the pressure of her hands could contain what was inevitable. But nature does not negotiate. One afternoon, during an exam period, a sudden sharp pain struck her abdomen like fire. She gasped, clutched the edge of her desk, and felt herself dizzy. Fear and panic mingled in a thick, suffocating wave. She bolted from the classroom, ignoring the curious glances of classmates. Legs trembling, she reached the bathroom, throwing herself into the stall, praying silently that no one would find her. She had done everything to protect herself, to protect her secret, but the body has a schedule no child can postpone. And in that cold, dimly lit stall, Amina realized with terror that she had no control over what was about to happen. The secret she had carried for months, the secret she had protected at the cost of her comfort, her dignity, her very sense of safety, was no longer hers to hide. Fear had a deadline, and it had arrived. The pain hit Amina like a hammer she hadn't seen coming. One moment she was clutching her stomach, trying to convince herself it was just cramps. The next, the floor seemed to tilt beneath her as if the world itself were rejecting her. Every breath felt sharp, cutting through her chest, and sweat poured down her face. She stumbled into the bathroom, ignoring the whispers and footsteps behind her, praying that no one would follow. She reached the last stall, the one with the cracked door and faded paint, and collapsed inside, knees trembling, heart hammering like a drum of warning. She wrapped her arms tightly around herself, trying to make sense of what was happening. Her body betrayed her, moving on a rhythm she had not learned, a rhythm she could not control. The first contraction knocked her to the tiled floor, cold against her skin, as if the very walls of the bathroom were pressing down in judgment. She cried out, muffled by the sleeve of her uniform, rocking back and forth, wishing for a midwife, a nurse, anyone. The stall offered no comfort, only silence and the echo of dripping water from a leaky pipe. And then it happened, the baby began to emerge. Amina's hands, trembling violently, tried to guide the child, wrapping her cardigan around the small, slippery form. The cries that erupted were both a relief and a terror. Relief because the child was alive. Terror because the sound carried through the walls, reaching ears she didn't want to hear. She hugged the tiny body against her chest, shivering, shuddering, unsure if she was crying for herself, for the baby, or for the shame she feared would follow. Each second stretched endlessly. Minutes felt like hours. The fluorescent light flickered above her, and she felt the magnitude of what had just happened pressed down with crushing weight. Outside the stall, doors banged and voices shouted. Classmates pressed against the walls, teachers' heels clacking against the floor, and the school counselor arrived, her face a mix of panic and disbelief. "Amina," someone yelled. But inside, Amina barely registered them. She pressed the baby closer, rocking slightly, murmuring apologies she could not explain. Her hands were slick with blood, trembling in ways she could not stop. She felt faint, dizzy, overwhelmed by fear, shame, and awe. No one could enter the stall yet, as if some unspoken respect for the magnitude of what had happened hung in the air. The cries of the baby carried through the corridor, piercing the false calm of normal school life, forcing every adult, every peer, to confront a reality they had ignored until now. Amina's secret, so carefully hidden, had chosen this moment, this place, to declare itself. And then the door finally opened. The fluorescent lights above seemed brighter now, almost accusing as teachers, students, and the counselor crowded around. Panic flashed across every face, questions forming, but none spoken aloud. Amina, shaking violently, hugged the newborn tighter, her eyes wide with terror, shame, and disbelief. Yet through it all, there was a faint, stubborn thread of relief. The secret, heavy as it had been, was out. The impossible, unbearable weight she had carried alone for months had finally emerged into the world. And in that moment, Amina realized that while fear had dominated her life, courage had also been born quiet, fragile, and trembling, but undeniable. The baby's cries continued, echoing off the cold tiles, demanding attention, demanding care, demanding recognition. And Amina, trembling but still standing, knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The moment the bathroom door swung open, Amina felt the weight of every eye in the school compound. Teachers, students, and even the janitor crowded the narrow corridor, their faces a mixture of shock, curiosity, and disbelief. Whispers ricocheted off the walls, soft at first, then louder, until the news of what had happened spread like fire. The baby's cries filled the air, drowning out everything else. The clatter of school bags, the laughter from the playground, even the sharp commands of the principal. For Amina, every glance felt like a judgment, every exhalation a potential accusation. She wrapped her cardigan tighter around the tiny, trembling child, rocking her gently, trying to shield her from the world she hadn't asked to be born into. The school counselor, a tall woman with kind but concerned eyes, finally approached. Kneeling beside Amina, she placed a careful hand on her trembling shoulder. "It's okay," she said softly. "You're safe now." Amina's breath hitched. Safe? The word sounded strange, almost foreign, after months of fear, silence, and hiding. Safe wasn't something she had allowed herself to imagine. Her mother? The boy who abandoned her? Her classmates? All of them were still outside, watching, whispering, questioning. But the counselor's presence was a lifeline, the first small hand reaching through the darkness. Slowly, Amina allowed herself to breathe, shivering but alive, the newborn pressing against her chest, as if sensing that this woman might be the first to understand. Soon, the principal arrived, followed by teachers who hovered uncertainly, unsure whether to scold, question, or help. Phones appeared, capturing the moment. Some students whispered judgments under their breath. But amid the panic, someone called for medical assistance. An ambulance arrived, its siren wailing, cutting through the chaos like a knife. Nurses and paramedics rushed in, lifting the baby carefully, checking her tiny body for signs of distress, cleaning and wrapping her in sterile blankets. Amina felt a mixture of relief and shame. Relief that her child was alive, that medical care had arrived. Shame that the world now knew, that whispers would not fade, that every secret she had carried alone was now a story told to everyone. Yet, as the nurses spoke softly to her, offering blankets and water, she realized for the first time in months that someone could care without judgment. Someone could respond without anger, without punishment. And then her mother arrived. She stood at the edge of the crowd, trembling, hands pressed to her mouth, eyes wide with shock. For a long moment, she simply stared, unable to speak. Amina's heart pounded, fear and dread blending into confusion. What would her mother say? Punish? Reject? Beat? But then, tears began to run down her mother's face, mingling regret, horror, and something else, something Amina had almost stopped believing existed: love. She moved forward, hands shaking, and knelt beside her daughter and the newborn, wrapping her arms around them both. The weight of silence, of months of fear, began to lift, replaced by a fragile, trembling hope. Around them, the school staff, students, and authorities watched quietly, sensing the magnitude of the moment. Compassion had arrived where judgment had been expected, and in that quiet, overwhelming space, Amina understood something she had only whispered to herself in the bathroom. She was not alone. The ambulance had barely disappeared down the street when Amina sat on a small cot in the school clinic, the baby swaddled against her chest, shivering slightly but alive. Her body ached in ways she hadn't imagined, muscles tense, joints screaming, blood lingering in her clothes and hair. Yet what weighed heaviest was no longer physical, it was the truth finally laid bare. For months, fear had been her constant companion, and now, compassion was meeting it for the first time. Nurses moved gently, checking the baby's vitals, murmuring reassurances, cleaning cuts, and soothing tears. One of them even offered Amina a sip of water, which she accepted with trembling hands, feeling more human than she had in weeks. For the first time, she realized that help could exist without punishment, that care could replace fear, even if just for a moment. Soon, social services arrived, led by a kind woman with a firm voice and gentle eyes. She asked questions slowly, deliberately, as if giving Amina permission to speak her truth without rushing, without judgment. Each word felt like a release. Amina told them everything: the boy who abandoned her, the nights spent crying alone, the fear of her mother's wrath, her desperation to stay in school. The woman listened without interruption, nodding and taking careful notes, occasionally murmuring, "You are brave, child. You've survived far more than anyone should." Amina's shoulders shook with relief, and for the first time in months, she dared to hope that the nightmare she had carried alone might finally have a path forward. And then came the moment that made her heart nearly stop. Her mother arrived at the school. She had been summoned, but the sight of her daughter holding the newborn, her tears mingling with fear and exhaustion, was more than she could bear. For a long moment, her mother simply stared, voice caught in her throat, hands trembling as they reached out. There were no angry words. There was only shock, disbelief, and then slowly, tremblingly tears. The mother's hands shook as they rested on Amina's shoulders, and she whispered, almost to herself, my child." The barriers of fear and silence that had governed their relationship for months began to crack. For the first time, Amina felt her mother's love override the weight of expectation and judgment. Forgiveness, unspoken but palpable, filled the room like a quiet wind, lifting the heaviness that had hung over them for so long. Medical staff, counselors, and social workers guided both mother and daughter through the next steps. Arrangements were made for proper medical care for Amina, a safe environment for the baby, and counseling sessions for both mother and child. The school, though initially shaken, pledged support. A plan for Amina to continue her education once she was ready, a space for her to regain the normalcy she had been denied. Outside, whispers lingered, but inside that small room, mercy had replaced judgment. The baby's tiny fingers curled around Amina's, her soft breaths syncing with her mother's trembling ones. In that fragile, overwhelming moment, Amina understood something powerful. While the world may have failed her before, there were people who could intervene, who could protect, who could help rebuild the fragments of a life nearly destroyed. For the first time, fear no longer ruled her. Compassion had arrived, and with it, the faint, persistent glow of hope. Recovery did not arrive as a single moment of relief. It came slowly in fragments, like light seeping through cracks in a closed door. The first nights after the birth were the hardest. Amina lay on a narrow hospital bed, the baby in a small cot beside her, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of medical machines and distant footsteps. Each time the baby stirred or cried, panic rose in her chest before she remembered that she was no longer alone. Nurses came when she called. Water was brought without her begging. Pain medication dulled the sharpest edges of her suffering. Still, sleep came in broken pieces. When she closed her eyes, she saw the bathroom stall, felt the cold tiles against her skin, heard the echo of her own muffled screams. She woke often, breathless and shaking, only to reach out and feel the warmth of her child's tiny body nearby. In those moments, fear loosened its grip just a little. She had survived the worst night of her life. Everything after that, she told herself, had to be survivable too. Her mother stayed close, quieter than Amina had ever known her to be. The woman who once filled their room with stern warnings and harsh prayers now spoke in whispers, as if afraid to frighten something fragile back into hiding. She watched her daughter closely, guilt written plainly on her face. Sometimes, when she thought Amina was asleep, she reached out and touched her hair, tears dropping silently onto the bedsheet. No apologies were spoken at first, but remorse hung heavy in the air. It showed itself in small actions. In the way she learned how to hold the baby, awkward but determined. In the way she asked the nurses questions instead of assuming she already knew the answers. In the way she no longer looked at Amina as a problem to be corrected, but as a child who had been in pain. One evening, as the sun dipped low outside the window, her mother finally spoke. "I was too hard," she said quietly, her voice cracking. "I thought fear would protect you. I didn't know it was hurting you." Amina said nothing, but she felt something inside her loosen. Forgiveness, she realized, did not always arrive with loud words. Sometimes it arrived as changed behavior, as gentler hands, as the simple decision to stay. The days passed and strength returned slowly to Amina's body. She learned how to breastfeed, fumbling at first, then gaining confidence as the baby latched on and fed quietly. She learned how to change diapers, how to recognize different cries, how to soothe with soft humming when words felt inadequate. The social worker visited regularly, checking in, offering guidance, reminding Amina that she was still a child herself and deserved support. Counseling sessions followed, difficult but necessary. In those rooms, Amina spoke about fear, about the months of hiding, the lies, the loneliness. She spoke about the boy who disappeared and the shame that followed. Each time she spoke, the weight on her chest grew lighter. She began to understand that what had happened to her was not simply a personal failure, but the result of silence, ignorance, and a world that punished girls for mistakes while offering them no guidance. That realization did not erase her pain, but it softened the edges of self-blame that had threatened to consume her. Conversations about school began cautiously. Amina feared rejection, feared being told her life had taken a permanent detour. But the school's response surprised her. The counselor visited, bringing books and notes from her teachers. There was talk of home tutoring at first, then gradual reintegration when Amina was ready. "Your mind is still sharp," the counselor said gently. "Motherhood does not erase that." The words settled deep inside Amina, nourishing a hope she had nearly buried. At night, when the baby slept, she opened her textbooks again. The numbers still made sense. The words still spoke to her. Learning felt familiar, grounding proof that she had not lost herself entirely. She imagined returning to the classroom, walking through the gate without fear, her head held higher, her secret no longer a weapon against her. Slowly, Amina began to breathe again, not the shallow, careful breaths of hiding, but fuller ones that reached deep into her chest. The world had not magically become kind. There were still whispers, still judgment, still hard days ahead. But there was also support, structure, and the growing realization that her life was not over. It was changing. Each morning, as she held her baby and watched the sunlight creep across the floor, Amina felt something unfamiliar but powerful: possibility. She was still afraid, still healing, still learning. Yet she was no longer alone. And for the first time since the secret began to grow inside her, Amina allowed herself to believe that her story could move forward, not defined by the bathroom where she gave birth, but by the strength it took to survive and begin again. Life did not return to normal for Amina, because normal no longer existed. Instead, a new rhythm slowly formed, uncertain at first, fragile, but real. The baby grew stronger with each passing week, her cries turning from weak, frightened sounds into firm declarations of life. Amina learned her child's face the way she once learned her textbooks, studying every expression, every small movement, every quiet breath taken while sleeping. In caring for her daughter, she discovered a strength she had never been taught she possessed. Motherhood did not erase her youth, but it forced it to grow up faster than it should have. There were days she felt overwhelmed, staring at the tiny life depending on her, and wondering how a girl who had been so afraid of being seen could now be responsible for another human being. Yet with each challenge came a quiet determination. She had survived secrecy, fear, and pain. She would not let silence destroy her child too. When Amina finally returned to school, it was not with the careless excitement of before, but with deliberate courage. The first day back, she paused at the school gate, her heart pounding, memories flooding her mind. This gate had once watched her walk in carrying a secret too heavy to bear. Now it watched her return carrying the truth openly. Some students stared. Some whispered. A few looked away in discomfort. But others smiled small, uncertain smiles that felt like kindness trying to find its way. Her teachers welcomed her quietly, without spectacle, without pity. Books were placed in her hands again. A desk waited for her. In that simple act, dignity was restored. Amina sat down, opened her notebook, and felt something steady settle inside her. She was still a student. She still belonged. At home, her mother had changed in ways that surprised them both. The rigid anger that once ruled their relationship softened into watchfulness and care. She became fiercely protective of both Amina and the baby, confronting gossip when it surfaced and insisting that her daughter's future mattered. Sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, she spoke of regret of how fear and strictness had blinded her to her child's pain. Amina listened, not with bitterness, but with understanding born from her own suffering. Healing, she learned, was not about erasing the past, but about choosing not to repeat it. Together, they began to build something steadier than before: trust. It was imperfect and slow, but it was real. As months passed, Amina's story traveled beyond the school walls. Social workers used it in awareness programs. Counselors spoke of it in hushed but urgent tones. Not to shame her, but to highlight what happens when young girls are forced into silence, when education about their bodies is replaced with fear, and when punishment stands where guidance should be. Amina did not always like hearing her story told, but she understood its power. If her pain could keep another girl from delivering alone on a bathroom floor, then it mattered. She began to speak carefully, when invited, about the importance of listening, of creating safe spaces, of choosing compassion over condemnation. Each time she spoke, she reclaimed a piece of the voice she had once buried. In the end, Amina did not see herself as a victim, though she had been one. She did not see herself as a warning, though her story warned many. She saw herself as a survivor, a girl who had carried a secret that nearly destroyed her, and who lived to tell the truth. She learned that silence is heavy, and when forced on a child, it can become deadly. But she also learned that empathy can save lives, that education can restore dignity, and that no mistake should strip a child of their future. Amina gave birth in a bathroom. Yes, but what nearly destroyed her was not childbirth. It was fear. And what saved her was not perfection, but compassion, courage, and the decision by a few to listen before it was too late.